Page down?
What's that?
Page down?
Arrow right or page down?
We're going to talk a little bit about a grazing system and how it falls into a grazing management plan. Most of you know who I am. That's who I am. I work part-time with the Ohio Department of Agriculture Division of Soil and Water. More doing these kinds of things and training new employees. So it's kind of like a brain transfer. My knowledge to some of the newer people that are being hired. So grazing management, Jared talked about that. I'm going to tie it into a grazing system and grazing plans. And I want you to think about your own system. And why is it important to have a plan? Do you have a plan? When the drought came, did you know what you was going to do? Or did you wake up and say, I got to do something? So, and that's part of having a grazing plan. You've already thought about it ahead of time. And hopefully you have it written down. But the other part is to help you meet your goals and objectives. And each one of you have a different set of goals and objectives. It's nice if the husband and wife have the same set of goals and objectives. And the kids in that house are part of that as well. Sometimes my kids had a different objective than what we were trying to do. But and each one of you have a different. Why are you raising what you're raising? Take some looks at your beef cows. Why do you have those cows? Are you selling bulls? You selling breeding stock? You selling club calves? You selling feeders every fall? Are you growing stockers? Do you have a grass-fed beef business? Or a beef marketing your beef directly? Most of us have our cows because we like cows, and it's the way we can use some of the land and the labor that we have. So my farm's a pretty rolling hard. I grow no crops. I don't make any hay. Every acre's grazed. Well, except for the woodlands, David. Okay. But
Wait, County, I don't care.
you don't care. But we try to make some money. Is that some of your goals and objectives? Anybody doing this just for fun? And I've worked with people that just have cows just for the fun of it. When it's 2 degrees tomorrow morning, I don't have fun going out there checking the cows. But some people do. The grazing management plan is why. A few more reasons from our point of view, those of us in the conservation business, it improves water quality. That's why we have some of the funding we have for programs, because it has a bigger picture. We can improve water quality for everybody. Our people in town like good, clear water, just like we do. Reduce your production costs. Make your animals do better. Land use efficiency. That means better use of what we have. How many pounds of beef do you get per acre off of your grazing system? Do you know that? Every one of our corn growing friends know exactly how many bushels per acre they got, and probably by the field. I'm asking you, do you know how many pounds of beef you sell per acre? It's a pretty easy number to do. If you're selling beef every year, total it up, divided by the number of acres you have. Is it going up or going down? Indication of your management and the efficiency of your system. Being a former soil scientist, I like soil health things. Improving the soil health. As we improve our soils and the health of our soils, we can grow more grass. Are you growing more grass? Probably not this year, but in the long term. Is your production getting better or worse? What's your soil test levels? The pH is going down or going up? What about your organic carbon? Soil organic matter. Is it going up or going down in your pasture fields? In worst case, do you not even know? How do we put carbon into the soil? Roots. Roots. Roots put it down there. The more roots we have, the more grass we're going to grow, but the more carbon we put down in the soil. And that's important. Some people think it's really important. What's some of your fundings for clean air, carbon reduction? Putting carbon, what has more carbon in it? Good grazing lands or a forest? In the soil. Grazing lands have the potential to put more carbon into the soil than a good forest. What did you learn in 4th grade? Plant a tree and save the world. I'm telling you, plant grass. Save more of the world. Management practices are problems. Unfortunately, many people see grazing as a problem. I don't know if you know what's going on out in LA. Some of the backgrounds in that. They took the animals off of those hills that used to graze those hills. They used to reduce that fire burden. They did that about 10 years ago. And that's some of the, if you don't know the background, they talk about the mismanagement of the land use. That's what they're talking about. The people didn't want to see animals out there grazing because they stunk in their minds. Because where's your cow's poop?
Wherever they want.
Out in the field. Well, those weren't usually cows out there, they were sheep grazing in those hills. But think about it. We were told grazing's a problem. Is grazing a problem? It's never the problem. It's the most natural thing that happens on a farm. A ruminant animal grazing forages. That's a natural thing to happen, should happen. The lack of management is usually the problem. Improving your management skills and your understanding. And that's what a grazing plan helps you do, to tie it together in terms of, if this happens, I need to do this. And looking at your management, that you know when you see this, I should be doing this. So it's continuous grazing, overstocking, and overgrazing. Are they the same thing or 3 separate things? I'm going to tell you there are 3 separate things. Those are 3 different problems. You can be continuously grazing and not be overstocked or overgrazing. I can be overgrazing regardless of anything I do. And many of us are overstocked, especially for beef cattle. Beef cattle at the high end of the economics or at the bottom? Are we at the peak or the valley? Do you know? We're at the peak. 600-pound steer calves were selling for $3.80 a pound out in Iowa yesterday. I'd love to sell a load of calves for that. Think about that. I can remember selling calves for 60 cents a pound. So we're at a high. So many of us have more cows than we probably do because we like to have that extra calves to sell. So, and that hurt us this year if we were in a drought. Have most of you sold animals? No. As I walk and listen across the state of Ohio, they talk about we were in a severe drought, extreme drought, but very few mama cows went to market. Some calves went early, but we held on to those cows because we know because what are they? Hopefully they're bred, going to have a calf. So think about that. What's that calf worth? Or going to be worth? Limited or inadequate water availability during a drought, does that come to mind? We've had people hauling water. I think some of them are still hauling water over in Morgan County. That's a problem. When we look at a drought, That should be one of the first things we look at. What's our most reliable water source? And that's gotta be the spot where they go during the drought. Did you stop grazing during your drought? Or did you keep the system going? Or were you set stocked, didn't continuously grazed? Then I can almost guarantee you overgrazed this year. And that's when you have, what do they call it in baseball? How many strikes do you get? And you're out. And that's what happened this year some, is the fact that we were continuously grazing and we were overstocked. I can almost guarantee you the next pitch was a fastball right down the middle and you swung and missed. And you're out. So what happens in a pasture field during a drought? Will your grass be back to next year? I can guarantee you no. It takes 2 years for a pasture to recover from a drought. How about the cornfield? No, we don't know, because it's an annual crop. Depends on what the weather is next year. We could have a bumper yield next year, but I can guarantee pastures will not have a bumper yield next year. Because you only have half a root system to start with. You're starting the year with only half a root system. And that's why it takes a pasture field 2 years to recover from a drought. So we'll be hurting for forages again this year and probably next year. Just from what happened last year. It takes you that long to recover from that. Uncontrolled stream access is another point, could be a potential problem. Where do cows get their water? Do cows naturally drink from a stream? And if so, where do they go in that stream to get a drink? In the deep water? Or where it's babbling? They go where it's babbling brook.
Depends how cold it is.
Well, if it's really cold, I know they go to the babbling part, because that's the only place there's no ice. The running water doesn't move. In the summertime, that bubbling water's moving and it stays clear. It's the pools that you see the yucky stuff grow. When you get the stagnant water, that's what we don't want to see. You probably saw some dead deer this year from drinking bad water. Hopefully your cows didn't have that problem. They were getting good, clean water. So water is a big part of that plan for most of us. Fertility is another level. Why do you have the pastures where you have them? As I've traveled the world, in this country, our pastures are usually the worst land on the farm. If you can't grow corn, then we put it into a pasture field, right? If I go to England and Ireland, the best land is their pasture fields. They grow wheat on the hilly, eroded hills. But their best fields are where they grow their grass for their grazing systems. Totally different concept than what we have here. Why is that? What's our number one crop?
Corn.
Corn. We're in the Corn Belt. How many corn specialists are there at Ohio State? I think there's 5. How many forage people are there? Now that's just researchers. There's other professors that teach corn production that don't do any research. They just, but think about forages. We have 2. And they teach as well as doing any research. Totally different in some of the other countries. The emphasis is on the forages and not on the corn.
Well, they gotta make their scotch and whiskey.
Well,
That's part of it.
important thing. Winter feeding areas. Probably one of our other problem areas of looking at where do you winter feed. So far this year, we haven't had much mud. It's been frozen. If we could have frozen and not be so cold, it'd be really nice. Where we winter feed can be a potential problem. Okay? And how we look at it. That we don't get any runoff into water courses. But All those problems can be solved with good management and a good grazing management plan. Answering those questions for your farm on how it can be done. Get the right bud. So there's two different, I'm going to simplify life. We have continuous or set stock and rotational systems. Continuous is usually a single pasture. You could have multiple pastures with animals in them all the time. Work with some great university horse systems. They wanted me to help them divide their pastures up. I thought, wow, this will be great, they'll be rotating. No, they put horses in every single pasture. It was just lots of individual, continuously grazing pastures. It's not the concept I'm trying to get across. Animals spend the whole grazing season in that area. Never, it's the rest. The plants never get any rest during the growing season. Animals have unlimited access to the whole pasture. See potentials with that? Animals make all the decisions. Is that wise? Do you have any educated cows that can make proper decisions? Lay it out for them and they'll pick the best one. What drives a cow to make their decisions? Is it long-term thought process? Is she worried about tomorrow? Or what she can eat right now? What she can eat so her buddy next to her doesn't get to eat it. It's kind of like feeding like a bunch of brothers at the dinner table. My mom, when the three of us boys were all teenagers, she would fix the plates and bring them to us rather than pass it around. She learned it is much less chaotic if she just fixed the plates for us. Why was that? Because we didn't make decisions. We just ate because we didn't want our brother to eat anything that we liked. Livestock numbers don't vary, meaning they're set. One of the things I talked about earlier is how many of you sold cows? I sold 1/3 of my cows back in July. July 5th, we locked them all down. Stopped rotating. The grass stopped growing, I stopped rotating. And we started feeding our winter hay supply. Fed to November the 4th. So from July 4th to November, we were not grazing. November 4th, we started grazing. Stockpile grass. And I'm setting hay bales out now for them as well. So they're grazing and eating hay as well now. I could grow grass after those rains in the end of September, October and November. I grew as much grass in October and November as I did in June, July, and August and September. Did you? Do you know how much grass you grew this year? Whoops. That's one of the things I talk about. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And we're talking about management. You've got to know how much you have. The disadvantages of continuous type grazing systems: reduced carrying capacity. Because we're not going to grow as much grass because the cows are eating it faster than it grows many times. Reduce the concentration of desirable plants. If you ever look at an extremely or continuous grazed pasture, what's gone? Legumes. And then what's left? In this part of the state, it's tall fescue and annual weeds, summer weeds. Because the weeds will come wherever there was a break in that fescue sod. Is that what we want? Increase in brush and undesirable plants. The things your cow don't want to eat. That's the decision she makes. Do I eat this thing I don't like, or do I eat the thing that's really tasty? She's making that decision every day for you. If you're not making the decision, she'll make it for you. Uneven distribution of manure. One of the things I got to do in the last years is going out into pasture fields and looking at areas where the animal manure concentrated. Where is it? Where your cows poop in a continuously grazed field? Around the water tank, the salt box, or if you're feeding out there, or the bale ring, wherever you're feeding. That's where the manure concentrates. Is that a problem? Can be if it's close to a water source. Some of our spots are really, really hot. I had many samples that came in over 500 parts per million phosphorus on a pasture field in those locations. Then I went 100 yards away, and it'd be 5 parts per million. 100 times less. That's poor distribution. That's like fertilizing your cornfield by going to one corner of it and dumping all the fertilizer in the corner and saying, I fertilized the corn crop. That's what you're doing to your pasture fields when the cow is making the decision of where she poops. Defoliation and water and erosion, one of the big issues we have. We have pastures in the state of Ohio that are eroding more than the crop fields. Think about that. They're in permanent cover and they're eroding at a higher rate than the crop field. Because where do we put our pastures? On the steep hills. And they take more cover than the crop fields to control that erosion. Lower utilization. Of all the forage you grow, if we don't manage it, we're only harvesting about 1/3 of it. How many of you would bale 3 bales but only take 1 out of the field? And leave the other 2 in the fence row to rot? That's what we do when the cow makes the decisions in the grazing system. Rotational grazing is where we divide the farm up into multiple paddocks and move the animals from field to field and resting the ones they're not in. And that's what we try to do. You don't go in and cut your hayfield every single day, do you? Can't do it because it doesn't grow back that fast, right? But in the pasture field, we have that mentality. We can harvest it day after day after day. Animals spend more time in one paddock than they rotate to the next. It's the rest is what we're trying to do. And it's based on plant growth. The faster the plant grows, the more rapidly we move. In my case, I wasn't getting any grass growth in the summer months, so we stopped the grazing. No sense having cows out there if the grass wasn't growing. So we stopped it, allowed those plants to rest during that time. I don't know, were they really resting when it hadn't rained? And the temperatures were so high? That's not a rest, folks, for the grass. The rest for a grass plant is when it's actively growing but not being consumed by an animal. If it's not actively growing, are your pastures being rested right now, today, tonight? And the answer is no, because they're not actively growing. So by rest, we mean resting when they're actively growing. Go quickly. Increase forage production, because I can grow, like I mentioned, I can grow more grass in the pasture field than you can in the hay field, assuming everything else is equal. The soils, the fertility, the forage species, because we maintain growth. Your cows should never stop a plant from growing. So in an ideal grazing system, when the cows didn't eat it, it eats it, and the next day it should grow the same every single day. The day before, the day it was grazed, and the day after. Grazing should not impact plant growth. That's the ideal grazing system, where the plant never stops growing to its optimum potential. And the other thing is reduce our winter feed. Now this year I have not reduced my winter feed because I fed it in the summertime. But for my case, by buying my hay, I'm buying my fertility, because I'm feeding that hay out in the fields. So those nutrients from that bale are being spread by my cows onto the pasture fields. Think about that. Instead of harvesting the hay off of my farm, I use somebody else's hay. Improved manure distribution. By rotating and moving the animals, they have the opportunity to spread that manure evenly across the farm. The more often you move them, the more evenly distributed the manure will be. I typically move my cows twice a day. Okay? Morning and evening. Some people feed them in the feedlot twice a day. I move my fence twice a day. Less forage is wasted. They'll eat a higher percentage of it. The more often I move, the higher that efficiency gets. So if I'm leaving them for 3 to 5 days, I'm probably in that 30 or around 50% utilization. That means I'm only leaving one bale in the fence row and I'm taking every other one out. So it's a little more efficient. If I move twice a day, I'm getting up to 80% efficient. Because they're not. They're eating more and wasting less. And I can put more weight. Because I'm thinking about how many pounds of beef per acre I can sell. Think about that. Pounds of beef per acre. Increased cost, yes. As we develop a grazing system, rotational grazing system, we're going to have increased cost in fencing. Temporary type fencing, if you like, or permanent one. Single wires will work for most beef cows. Watering points, need to probably put in more watering points. How many years has it been, David? 40 years ago when I started talking about grazing system, we talked about walking cows to the water. Because a lot of times all we built were 1 or 2 watering points on the farm. Developed 1 or 2 springs. Put in 1 or 2 big tanks. And then we divided the farm up when we got to a grazing system from that single watering point, walking the animals back and forth. In the last 20 years, we've talked about piping water is cheaper than walking the animals. It's become cheaper to bury flight. But it does take a little more labor, but for some of us, we like to see our cows. Go back to that, why you're doing it. Nothing's more thrilling to me than walk out to the pasture field in March and April and seeing a new calf up and nursing with the sunshine on him or her, and I didn't have to do a thing. Those are my kind of cows. Give birth early in the morning before I get there, and all I get to see is a brand new calf. Many principles are based on grass productivity by Andre Voisin. You may have heard me talk about him. He was a French farmer, a biochemist, and an author. He wrote that book, and best known for the theory of rotational grazing. He did it by staking his cows out. They were all collared, and he tied them with a rope or a chain, kind of like tying out your dog. Every day he would move the peg to a new, for each cow across the fields, and that's how he rotationally grazed. And that time. Thank goodness for electric fencing. It's based on his principles of matching the plant's need for rest after a grazing harvest with the animal's need for high quality feed. Are your pastures meeting the needs of your animals? Is the quality of that feed great enough to meet their needs? Do your cows' nutritional needs change throughout the year? And the answer to that last one is yes. When is her greatest needs for the highest and most and highest quality feed?
Last trimester.
Yeah, about 45 days pre-calving and post-calving. There's about 3 months right during the calving process, that she needs the most and the highest quality feed. Where is she in those 90 days on your farm? What is she eating? First cutting round bales? Or is she grazing good green grass? Electric fencing, the psychological barriers, it's gotta hurt so bad that she never wants to touch it again. Okay? That means it really hurts when you touch it too. The goal of keeping forage vegetative. We talk about no seed heads. Some people get anal over that. If I see a few seed, it's not a big deal. I didn't clip any pastures this year. I used my animals to maintain the seed heads. Yeah, if you went out there into May, 1st of June, you would find a seed head about 2 per square foot. That's all. My cows did a good enough job in the sheep of managing those seed heads. And then we just let it grow. But the problem was it stopped growing by mid-June. We didn't get much regrowth. Adequate rest periods, short durations, we only graze for a short period of time. How many days are your pastures grazed on your farm? Mine are only grazed 7 to 9 days a year. We're moving that much. And they're outside 365 days. Think about that. And we match the forage animals to their needs. I sell grass-fed beef. I put 4 pounds a day on steers grazing summer annuals. For 100 days, they put on 400 pounds. There were 9 of them, 9 steers. We moved them all twice a day, and that's how I weighed them before we put them on, and I weighed them when we took them off. I've never been so happy in my life as to do that. Fluharty, for some of you know Francis Fluharty. Always had fun sharing that story with him in the Dublin. Because it equals more profit per acre. I'm in it to make some money too. Not just for the fun of seeing newborn calves. I like to manage my weight per acre. It's going to be down this year. I know it will be. But I'm controlling what the cows eat. My cows do not make any decisions. Other than, don't touch that fence. Don't touch that fence. They learn that from an early age. Reduced waste. I prefer them to eat all the forage that I grow. I know I can't do that, but I try to get that percentage as high as possible. Provides an up to 70% plus. I've been at 85%. I let them spread their own manure. I let them harvest their own feed. I reduced my tractor hours. This year not so much because I've had to do more hay feeding. Can reduce manure storage needs. Dave will never come out, or my Pickaway County NRCS friends, and build me a manure storage structure. I have no need for that. Might have a need for another feed pad. But I'm not going to build a manure storage. And increase my profitability. This is Jim Garrish. I love that slide. Who's in charge? Do you work for the cows? Will you wake up tomorrow morning with the notion that I gotta go do something for my cows? Gotta go feed them. Or do you wake up, the cows are working for me today. They're mowing that stockpile now. They're fertilizing my pasture fields by spreading their own manure. Think about that. And it's more of a mindset of how you think about what your cows are doing. Fits all kinds of species of livestock. I'm a shepherd as well. Never been a goat herder. Some other, legumes. I'm going to tie it back to the drought now. most of us, I can guarantee if you were in the drought, your percentage of legumes have gone down, if not disappeared. Legumes are not typically very good. Alfalfa is the exception, but most of you probably don't have alfalfa in your pasture fields. But the clovers are generally not deep rooted very much, and they don't have sense to go dormant during the drought, like our grasses do. If your pastures turn brown in the middle of September, before that hurricane came, those were the grasses. They went dormant. Any green you saw out there were probably legumes or weeds, and they usually die because they don't go dormant. They'll go dormant in the winter, but not in the summertime or in the drought. Improve productivity. Put legumes out there. We have a great opportunity this spring here, next month, the next 8 weeks, to get more legumes in our pasture field. Look at procuring some clovers for your pasture fields. Not only that, they'll help give you more growth in the summertime. Annual ryegrass, I don't know if you can read that one. It's another opportunity we have. If you have a thin pasture, if you were out looking at your pasture fields this fall before the snow, or if you haven't, as soon as the snow leaves, go out and look at them and see what you have. Ryegrasses, annual ryegrass is an inexpensive way to get you through the next year or two. I told you it takes 2 years for your pastures to recover from a drought. This is one of those ways of bridging that gap, if you will. Grow forage. Annual ryegrass will die out, won't compete with your perennials as they recover and get more robust. And it fits a lot of our soil types. Next one. Annual and Italian types of ryegrasses. There are several new ones that'll be out there. A lot of some they're making some hybrid crosses as well. Festoleum is a cross between meadow fescue or tall fescue with ryegrass. Those are other options to do that. You want to use a tetraploid rather than a diploid if you can. Makes a big difference because the leaves are wider, a little better quality feed with the tetraploids. Oh, rock seeding. Remember my snow, sorry. 8 pounds per acre is all you probably need in a pasture field, but that's dependent on how much you have. That 8 pounds is based on a 50% stand in your pasture field. So if your perennial grasses make less than 50%, you'll probably have to up that. If it's more, you probably go down a little bit. But some of the varieties, Green Spirit, Feast 2, Tetra Prime, Winterhawk, and Hercules are all tetraploids. And we're good in there. The bottom 2 are annuals. The top ones are Italian type ryegrasses. And the Italians they grow through one winter only. So if you plant them in the spring, they'll grow all summer long, never make a seed head. Next winter, they'll winter over, come up next spring at 26, and then they'll make their seed head and die. So they give you a lot of growth if you're planting them in the spring. I'll stop. Just some little tidbits on how they graze through the growing season. You know how your cows work. They work a little different than sheep. They graze a little longer, usually 5 or 6 grazing periods in the 24-hour period. This time of year, they don't graze much at night. In the summertime, they graze a lot more at nighttime, especially with a full moon. Your cows may graze all night long, sleep all afternoon, kind of like teenagers. All right, I can stop there. Oh, who's in charge? Yeah. Who's in charge on your farm? The dogs or the rams? I like that one too. Being the shepherd. All right, questions? Talked longer than I thought, Jared. Which doesn't surprise you, right? Yeah, go ahead.
What type of clover is preferred around
Red is always a good choice for our pasture fields. I like the white clovers too, the intermediates, things like Alice. Can't think of another, or the white clover, the intermediate white clovers. Patriot, that's another name. They're usually the intermediates are a cross between the short white clovers and Ladino. They're not true Ladino. Ladino will get rank and tall. The intermediates get halfway in between. So, but they have great big leaves. Look at some of the newer varieties. They're worth it. They make more nitrogen per acre, almost twice as much. And if you look at nitrogen prices, they're going to fertilize your pastures, and there isn't that much difference in the price. So,
Isn't there a fair amount of hard seed in the ground now? to where
can be, depends on if you
clovers
had
will
clover
come?
in the past.
I mean, didn't have clover, but I don't know how many hundred years ago we sowed first with tree, or, hairy vetch.
Hairy vetch
And lo and behold, it's also.
this summer.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, it had to been 20 years.
Some of the hairy vetches will last a long time in the soil. They have a very hard seed.
Yeah.
Red clovers, the white clovers are a little better and last in a long time. But more than likely, they're better vetches now than they were 20 years ago. Same with the red clovers. So about every 5 to 10 years, there's a big improvement in the genetics of the plants. How long does the corn hybrid last in the market? 4 to 5 years. Why? What happens to it?
Well, we do better than one.
Yes. Now, being a corn country, they do it a little quicker than we do for grasses and clovers, but for clovers, it takes about 10 to 15 years to get that genetic improvement. If you go to New Zealand, they plow their pastures up every 5 to 10 years and replant new ryegrasses. Because their ryegrasses are like our corn hybrids. Every 5 years, there's a new and better ryegrass. They can justify reestablishing their whole farm to a new variety. Think about that. Any of you ever think about doing that?
What do you do provide shade for your animals hot summer days when you're grazing rotational?
Typically not. Now, there are some shade areas. If it's really, really hot, we'll move them too, but only for a few hours in the afternoon. Understand shade, for it to be real shade, the cows have to be laying down. And not another cow within 5 to 10 feet of them. If your cows are standing and huddled up under a shade tree, there is no benefit to that shade. They gotta be spread out. The best thing you can do for shade is plant clover. What did I tell you about the clover plant? It doesn't go dormant. So that means it's respiring. What's the temperature of your soil in the summertime of the moisture coming out? As that clover plant's respiring, it's pulling moisture out of the soil. What's your soil temperature? My soil temperature barely gets above 70 degrees. There's enough shade there, it keeps it cool. So the water coming out of that ground is 70 degrees. Where do those cows lay down? On the grass that's gone dormant? That's over close to 100 degrees. Or into clover, that's 70. They spread their big belly out over that clover patch because it's much, much cooler. So I'm going to tell you, if shade's an issue, then you ought to be planting more clover. Because that's better for most of us than what we have in terms of shade. The ideal shade has a tree looks like a city park. There's grass underneath and the crowns of the trees are not touching. And they got to be spread out. Most of us don't like trees in our pasture to mow around, do you? Now I use a lot of wood. I have a woodland edge. I use a lot. And then I have a small stream that goes through, that gives me some shade. It runs north to south, so they'll get on one side of it in the afternoon. But like I said, we'll take them there after lunch, 1:30, and then by 6 o'clock, we move them back out. They're just there for their hottest period of the day.
So for your summer grasses, did you just take a paddock and wipe everything out that's in there and then plant summer grasses? Or
No.
did you kind of mix them together with the?
My summer annuals, I usually take a paddock and overgraze it on purpose in the spring of the year. And then we'll go in and interseed, like a cover crop, if you will, into those sorghum sudan grass. I usually put a summer legume, cowpeas. I've looked at some in. And then usually a tall growing brassica. I use T-Raptor, which is a hybrid kale turnip. And they all grow at the same height. That's the reason I selected those species. So they come in. Many times the cowpeas will only get one grazing out, they won't grow back. They come to flower, and so they generally grow. The kale, T-Raptor, and the sorghum sudan grass will keep growing back. I can get 3, 4, 5 grazings out of it in the summertime.
You're spreading seed on it?
I drill it in, no-till drill, and interseed it. I try to get it done before May 1st, but I still have some soil moisture. Now this year, I did it, and it only got that tall. Had this little giant, midget sorghum sudan grass, they headed out, but it never grew. Now, I also have, what Jason's got, native warm seasons too, that are throughout. So I have switchgrass, eastern gamma grass, a little bit of blue, some Indian grass.
And then the next spring, the annuals over there, you come back.
No, the annuals are done. They're summer annuals, they're
Not
done.
annuals, I mean perennials.
The perennials last forever.
But I mean, so you took a pasture that was just a regular cool season grass.
Well, initially, 1985, but the year I bought the farm, we took a 5-acre field and devoted it to warm season grasses. Then, 5 years later, I introduced eastern gamma grass as a buffer along the edge of one of them that ran the length of the farm. So I planted it the entire length of the farm, about 12 to 15 feet wide, of eastern gamma grass. The big blue stem and Indian grass, I interseeded over time into that existing switchgrass field, the original 5 acres. Now, you go to my farm, you'll find switchgrass and Indian grass meet all over the farm. I never interseeded those areas. My theory is that the wildlife has moved it. It's this wonderful wildlife habitat this time of year. The deer are bedded down in the switchgrass field tonight, I can guarantee it. And they get up in the morning, or how early deer get up when it's 5 degrees. And then they go out in the other parts of the farm and lay down, and after they've grazed and lay down, I think the seed is in their hair coat, and as they lay down and waller, the seed comes back out and they've spread it around that way. Because I physically have not scattered seed on the farm, other than those 2 plantings I made. But, I like the warm seasons, but again, they didn't get 7, 8 feet tall this year. They got 4 foot tall.
I'm just saying. How tall are you, Bob?
They didn't get very tall, but they still outgrew. They were growing in the heat of the summer. When everything else was brown, they were still yellowish green. Understand that I'm in Pickwick County. Our drought hit earlier. We were that brown dot early on, but we lost it before some of you here in Fairfield County too. So the transition's different. But This is our 5th dry fall in a row. The last 5 years, we've had extremely dry falls. Less than 5 inches of rain from Labor Day to Thanksgiving. Not that we didn't get any rain, but we've never gotten our typical wet fall.
You didn't get that hurricane rain?
I got 3 inches.
3 inches? There you go.
Except that turned the farm around though. Now the pond is still only half full. I've yet to get any runoff into the pond.
Springs ain't run yet either.
So, now my little stream, little babbling brook, has now got running water in it. But, I've dug some fence posts, and you get below a foot, and it's just dust. So we've got a ways to go yet before we build soil moisture. So, thanks.